I am Terry Gibbons, the CEO and founder of the Center for Higher Education Leadership. And we're talking to a fantastic group about what's next for higher ed. And I have a couple of announcements really quick. Just so folks know, we're moving to monthly webinars. Our next webinar will be May 28th. And the reason we're having it later in the afternoon is because we're going to be joined by our friends at the peer review portal from Australia. So we're going very international the next time around, but we'll be talking about issues like accreditation and program review. These are really hot topics as we go into the fall, and we have to figure out how to do these things in a perhaps different way than we have before, and the importance of assessment. We have people from all over the country I see in our chat. And then tomorrow, Chell turns 1. We are having our 1-year anniversary, and we'll be having a launch into year 2 party on social media. So let me go ahead and introduce our guests. We have Tom Shaver, I can say your name right, who is the founder and CEO of Astra, and I have benefited from learning more about their organization and the amazing work they do around course scheduling and using on-campus resources. And then I have to say, Gary Stocker and I have been having a great conversation going on LinkedIn the last few weeks around collaboration. I wrote an article about it, and Gary had already been thinking about these things. So that's been fantastic sharing ideas. And then we are very, very pleased because we got him at the last minute, Dr. Glenn Roquemore, who's the president of Cal Southern. And we are very excited to have him joining us and getting his perspective from a 100% online university. And so I just want to say a few comments before we get started. I've been obviously thinking about this idea of collaboration even before this crisis. And so, to me, this is not about the crisis. This is about the future of higher ed and how is higher ed going to survive. I was at an institution that a very small institution before I started Chell that, was very tuition dependent, had a small endowment. And, to me, even at that point, it seemed like it was going to be critical to have a collaboration that would allow us to share resources, reduce our costs. And I apologize to those. I'm going to turn off video because we're trying to, if you're just a participant, we're going to turn off video because we're trying to save bandwidth. So sorry for the interruption there. In any case, we really need to think through, we've got the online component, we've got the residential component, we've got how do we get more students into into college in an affordable way, and use it, and I know from my own experience, having been on one of the biggest campuses in the country, UT Austin, and one of the smallest, Menlo College, we only had 800 students at Menlo College, yet we still aren't using our resources well. We got classrooms empty half the time. And yet there's so many, people talk about the enrollment decline, but the reality is there's more students than ever who are going to be needing to get some kind of college level training. And so anyway, that's my take on these issues. And we're really happy to have everybody here today. Again, check the comments and Gary, just when you come up, I'll stop sharing the screen. But for now, Tom, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Sure. Hi again, I'm Tom Shaver, founder and CEO at Astra. We've been exclusively focused on higher ed since January of '96, so a little over 24 years now. Prior to that, I worked with my dad, who was an architect who was also focused on educational design work. And so his work dated back to the 50s. We did consulting together, and then I started at Astra in '96. We have right around 520 institutions that we work with currently, and we're focused on this kind of seemingly mundane little slot within higher education of rolling out a schedule. The argument we make, and the reason that I'm still so passionate about it today, is that the schedule is really arguably the most foundational thing we do as colleges and universities, because we exist to teach students through courses, and the schedule is obviously the mechanism through which that occurs. It's also the mechanism through which we allocate, depending on the kind of institution, half or more of the operational budget. And those of you that have been involved in scheduling over the years know that the schedule also is something that is typically not very optimally organized and executed. We like to start with the question of, why we're even rolling out a course schedule. It's kind of a borrowing from the Simon Sinek start with why framework. Most people will say that all the way up to the mission level of the institution, they exist to transform lives of their students. And so if we start there, then the framework that he suggests, Simon Sinek that is that we build our standard operating procedures around our why so that they'll support our why. And in most cases, I think we can acknowledge that how we roll out a course schedule isn't optimized for transforming student lives always. And it's nothing that's really diabolical I believe that basically all of the faculty and department chairs on campus really are passionate about graduating students, especially in this era going forward, where those credentials are going to be critical for students to be able to get good jobs. But the process isn't optimized for that. And it's a process that's been kind of handed down and inherited and kind of really not even reflected on or challenged over the years. And it's a process that's really optimized more for departmental autonomy than for really meeting the needs of students so they can make maximum degree progress and graduate. And again, that's not a knock on anybody. That's just the process we've all inherited over the years. But where we see our mission, and I think where we see our mission really being even more important going forward, is that in a time where I think the industry as a whole is anticipating some real financial challenges, how do we still pursue improved outcomes? How do we still pursue a more educated society? Some of these objectives that started with President Obama years ago, how do we still pursue those things with fewer dollars? And our belief is one of the things we need to do is to really think hard about how we roll out our course schedule. And it could be all online, like Dr. Roquemore's institution, and it could be hybrid, it could be on ground. And so this is less about my saying that a particular model is needed in that regard from a modality standpoint, because I think different institutions fill different demographics. What I'm really proposing is that the schedule needs to start with this idea that it's not just an amalgam of loosely managed activities for different faculty members. It has to be a cohesive, systematic thing that really allows students to progress conflict-free through their pathways that they're being advised to follow so that they can graduate on time. And we need to make hard decisions like, how do we, if we have 3 campuses at an institution and an online college, and we do day classes and night classes, that's 7 different ways theoretically that we can teach every major. But if we have, let's say, 100 majors, we probably only have 4 or 5 that have a critical mass of enrollment that would support 7 distinct cohorts of students progressing in those unique ways. Well, can we be thoughtful about that? Can we analyze that? Can we decide how we're going to roll out these majors in a cohesive way across academic units? All get together, be transparent with our students so they can plan their lives, especially, the post-traditional students where we're trying to close these equity gaps. They have an enormous challenges, obviously, in terms of taking care of relatives or children at home. They have transportation challenges, but we're not building schedules with the transparency and cohesiveness that would allow them to succeed. the good news about all of this, we think the opportunity is that a student aligned schedule and a cohesive schedule is by definition also a resource efficient schedule, because we're not rolling out a bunch of offerings with expensive, valuable faculty members teaching 4 students instead of 20 or 25, which was the desired, let's say, cap of the class. So that's really where we, again, it's kind of mundane, but it requires an enormous amount of planning, enormous amount of coordination and collaboration between academic units, and just rethinking that the schedule is actually, it's got to be a systematic thing. It has to be an institution-wide kind of an asset that we manage in that way. And we have to be optimizing for our mission, not for departmental autonomy in this day and age.
Absolutely. I agree, as you know, 100% with that. I think a lot of times that we have a tendency in higher ed, and one of the things I want to acknowledge is that a lot of the news I'm seeing out right now is really focusing in on the kind of top level institutions, and there's not a lot of focus on where most students are going to college.
Right.
It's the Texas A&Ms and the Notre Dames and the Boston, but most students in this country are not going to those types of institutions. Right. They're at community college, there's online colleges, they're at state colleges, the kind of what we would call, not that they're any lesser, but that they're, kind of the lower tier institutions. And that's really where we should be focusing more of the resources, I think, because that's where the bulk of our students are getting their education.
Absolutely. And, and there's, also, I think, we need to say that there's far from anything wrong being an institution that's focused on undergraduate instruction. We don't all have to aspire to be research one, prestigious, from a research cachet standpoint. Can't we just educate undergraduates and be really good at graduating them?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's one of the reasons I decided to move from UT Austin to Menlo College, because I really do care about undergraduate education and wanted to be at a place where the focus was more on teaching and undergraduates. Not that big institutions can't be, but there are different incentives certainly for faculty.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right, well, let's go over to Gary, and you can go ahead and share your screen because I'm not sharing mine at the moment. And
thank you, ma'am.
There you go.
And good morning to everybody. Just bring up something quickly here. Good morning again. My name is Gary Stocker out of St. Louis. And here's the point that I'm going to make on collaboration. And all the stuff that we're talking about is a financial statement crisis. Terry mentioned really we're looking forward, and that's true. But what we do at College Viability is we look at the finances of private colleges, we don't do publics, across the country and make them easy to compare, both for college leaders, board members, presidents, and even for parents. We have an application that allows us to do that. Because we believe that collaboration in a financial sense needs to be to scale. And the model that we have written about, and I think, Terry, some of the things you have seen, are we have developed models that show 10 or more private colleges in some sort of alliance, be that an operational agreement, a joint venture, a true merger, in rare cases an acquisition. Scale is needed to manage the cost piece. I am guessing that most of the colleges and organizations represented today have done a lot of cost cutting already. We read where the cost cutting has been to the bone and that there's really no ways to cut material costs left. And so the only way to do that is to look at the kind of large scale alliance that we've seen really in almost every other industry, from automobiles to hotels to airlines to you name it, grocery stores. That kind of large scale collaboration has come into play. And what we have done, and I'll go over this in the screen just briefly here in a second, is we've taken the data from the National Center for Education Statistics, the IPEDS database, and we have made it easy for folks to look at, customize, read, and understand. And here's the point that we're trying to make. We are all intimately familiar with FAFSA. We have all filled them out. I know I have. And so that gives And that gives colleges a chance to know the finances of students and parents. But really, it's very difficult for parents and students to understand finances of colleges. And so if you will, what you see on your screen is our equivalent of a FAFSA. And I'll just pause for 1 second to show you what it's about. And then Terry, I'll turn the screen back over to you. And again, what you can see here is we have grabbed, there's 23 colleges here from 11 different states. And again, all of this data is from iPads. And we've looked at the 6-year changes from fiscal years 2013 to 2018. We're not doing any predictions. This is the raw data. We do a little subtraction. That's all that we do. And so you can see some colleges, some small to medium-sized private colleges represented, the states they're from. And just let's look at a couple of data pieces just to show how we compare things. Let's look at one of the colleges here in St. Louis. And over the last 6 years, from 2013 to 2018, their enrollment has gone, their full-time equivalent enrollment has gone down about 500 students. On the other end, an organization in Maid, Hassan University, has done better with enrollment growth of over 3,000. But this gives us a chance to compare really everything in between. We can sort this, if you want to do it alphabetically, we can sort it alphabetically, but that's not the point. Let's look at expenses. And I clicked on expenses, and let's look at those. We'll leave them in the top. So Simmons University in Massachusetts has had their expenses go up 65 million over the course of those 6 years. Their revenue has gone up 55 million. Do the math. Not really a good situation, not one that's tenable on the long term. The way to manage these collaborations from a financial perspective, and that's the point that we're trying to make, is to manage this column by sharing those expenses with other organizations. So you scale everything from leadership salaries, and then we all know what the story is behind that. And then just look at revenues. Here's core revenues. Let's go from the bottom this time. So here's an organization, Norwich University. I use Quincy University in Illinois. This is one of the, how am I nice here? Nicest, one of the most challenged private colleges in the country. Their auditors for 2017, 2018 expressed a going concern, which is not a good thing, about the viability of Quincy University. And you can look and you understand why. Their expenses have gone down 3.5 million, understandable. Their revenues have gone down not quite 9 million. So this is kind of what we do across the board. This is the summary. And again, we do it for different categories. This is the same 23 colleges, but it itemizes the enrollment for each of the years. The endowment we didn't look at before, we can look at that. So Fontbonne University had an endowment of 20 million in 2013. It's down 6 million in 2018. Again, you can draw your own conclusions. The last thing I want to show on the video, and then Terry, I'll give it back to you, is I'm assuming we all followed the announcement from McMurray College, which is a couple hours north of St. Louis a couple years ago, and their announcement of the closure. I just want to point out a couple of things that show us how easy it is to see which of these colleges cannot reasonably expect to continue as standalone parochial models. And first one is from the balance sheet, and this is copy and paste because it's easier to read. They started with $1 million and change in 2019, and not even $1 million to start their year in 2017, 2018. And I understand that May 31st, which is when their fiscal year ends, is a low cash point, but nonetheless, that's a small number. Let's look at their debt. Their McMurray College is $9 million in change in debt. Not a monstrous number, but of course you have to pay interest on that debt. And when you pay that interest, that's money you can't spend on salaries and academics and those kind of things. Their endowments, in finance speak, their net assets without donor restrictions, essentially cash. You don't see this very often. $1.4 million in the hole. And even the donor restrictions, the $20 million number is 30 million below what's generally accepted to be a modest number to start with. And then here's what we read about. Terry, this is what you and I have talked about. This is from the statement of activities for the fiscal year ending May 19 of last year, or May 31st of last year. McMurray had $13 million in list fees. That's what they would have charged to get their standard tuition. They discounted 7 million and change of that and only netted 5 million. This is what's happening everywhere because each individual private college is offering that tuition discount. That's all it is. Like you and I buying a car and getting $1,000 off. It's a tuition discount. That's where the revenue fall will continue because especially as you move forward. these organizations, Terry, will want to increase revenue and they'll do anything. And now they're allowed to bring a student on board. And with that, Terry, I'll turn the screen back to you.
Thanks. And you know, the reason that Gary was saying they're allowed to, because now there's you know, basically the antitrust ruling came down around admissions, and so there's no longer kind of this, it was really more of a gentleman's agreement, but that you can go after somebody else's admit after, you know, basically May, which of course some schools ignored anyway. But yeah, it's a really interesting situation for a lot of colleges, because the way they're attracting more students, even though their enrollment might be increasing, the way they're doing it is by offering them more, and so the bottom line is not increasing. And that's something that I have been worried about for a while. But in any case, let's pass it over to Glenn. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you, Terry, and everybody that's joined today. Again, my name is Glenn Roquemore, and let me give you a little bit of a framework here, is that I've been in higher education for 30 years, and most of that time was in the public sector. I worked for a community college and spent 18 years as a community college president. So during that time, I was involved in trying to facilitate the institution into moving into some portion of online learning. And I have to tell you that I met an awful lot of resistance. And part of it is the framework of our fine faculty and the perception that online is not going to produce the same quality, the same experience. And so as I read that, and perhaps get a little bit controversial here, is that then that becomes more about them and less about the student. And so it gets manifested in interesting ways, as Tom talked about, is that when you're talking about a schedule, then how is that schedule being developed? Is it being developed with the mindset that we're here to serve students and we're here to allow them access and the ability to succeed? Well, we know that a lot of these schedules are not set up that way. So the change that has to occur, it has to be us. And, you know, I'm fortunate to have a 14-year-old boy who's right now upstairs doing his 8th grade class online. But even before this pandemic, he was doing the same, in that a large portion of his out of class time was all online. And so, in fact, he's the family technologist. And so that tells me that that mode of delivery is highly acceptable to this particular generation and the generation before. And so how do we adjust our thinking on that and be able to deliver our education in ways that are very different and perhaps uncomfortable for some of our faculty? So another example I have is my wife teaches chemistry at a community college, and she's done so for 23 years. And all of a sudden now, just in a few weeks, she has converted all of those chemistry courses to online. And I have to tell you that before that, she would not have thought about doing something like that. And of course, honestly, the laboratory portion remains to be very challenging. She loves it. She actually does love teaching online and has been successful in making that conversion. And so it really gets us down a little bit to an equity situation on two fronts. One is, how are we able to serve students that cannot go into a brick and mortar, and are underserved students that can't afford to go into a brick and mortar on a regimented schedule because they have other things in their lives they have to take care of. They may be single parents, they have to work. And so how can we provide that access and education? Well, online is a modality that will do that. As long as you're set up in teaching the class in a way that it's flexible and not on a Tuesday, Thursday from 8:30 to 10:30 kind of format, which is what we do at California Southern. And so here students can take the courses on their own time. So it's not unlike a MOOC format that I take advantage of just for my own enrichment. And so that provides the access. Now I have to say though, that the other side of equity is that we're still not 100% there in terms of the electronic access for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so while laptops may be fairly ubiquitous, the bandwidth is not. And so as we get more sophisticated in teaching online, the demand on technology is going to increase as we expect the quality to increase. For example, if you're thinking about doing a chemistry lab, you can imagine there will be a lot of simulations involved in that. We have a nursing program, and so there are simulations that are involved in that nursing program. It goes all the way up to the doctorate level. So I think we need to adjust and be thinking how we go out into the future. Yes, it's absolutely true that the brick and mortar being in the classroom is definitely for some students. But when you think over time as well, that most faculty have gone to a learning management system. And so they have for their own classrooms, basically the baseline for online.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they're still functioning, in the brick and mortar. So I think it's for that very reason that the transition has not been devastating and actually has been much easier to go online because of that very fact. So in terms of collaboration and how we're able to help, well, we've been doing this for 40 years. Now, all 40 years, of course, was not all online because the technologies weren't there that many years ago. But we have been 100% online for a very, very long time. And so different kinds of modalities fit into that. I think we can certainly provide courses for students that are in a brick and mortar format and need to fill in their schedule because the schedule is awkward for them. And so they can pick up some undergraduate work from us and then also graduate level work. So it does provide that flexibility and the sharing, and we do reach out particularly to community colleges to let their students know that we have courses that are available online if they need to fill in the schedule. Mm-hmm. So that's the collaboration piece. And fortunately, most have been very excited about doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because even when I was provost at Menlo College, when a student, because we were so small and had so few faculty, we weren't always able to offer every single course at the right time for every student. And so we would often send them to an online college and say, okay, this is a course, but the critical point of that was being able to accept those credits and make sure that the course they were taking met our requirements. And that's something where I think the collaboration has to begin, is sharing of syllabi, looking at ways to do transfer credits. And of course, all of that is regulated in various ways.
Well, if I can jump in quickly,
sure.
One of my soapboxes is that I absolutely deplore articulation. It has driven me crazy for 30 years because we make a guarantee to our students that they finish up with us, they're going to progress, they're going to move forward, and yet they continually hit a roadblock that their transfer institution of choice will not take all of their credits.
Mm-hmm.
That has to change. I think that has to be a major change in the educational system throughout the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a question, or it's more of a comment, I think, is that accrediting bodies differ in allowing simulated clinical hours, and it's a big problem for programs in her university in terms of remote teaching now, and even the possibility this fall. So again, it comes back to the accreditors and yes, articulation agreements were sometimes the bane of my existence as a provost because we had to constantly be looking at them and updating them and making sure that, it's both for us in terms of the courses we were offering, but also what credit we were able and willing to take in. And this is even more critical because unfortunately, as Gary's data is showing, a lot of institutions are going to fail and not be able to continue after this coming year. And it's a process that had begun obviously years before because of the increase in discount rates and so on. So for those of you who don't know what a discount rate is, that's what Gary was showing us, which is basically that almost every private institution in this country has some level of discount that is, anywhere from 5% to over 50%. If you're getting over 50%, you're not viable, as Gary, I'm sure, can tell us. So go ahead, Gary, you had a comment?
Well, yeah, I just want to tie in with what Glenn was talking about with articulation. And again, that has been a challenge for many, but let's envision a collaborative scenario. And Glenn, you could pick 10 or 20 colleges in your area, and let's envision those 10 or 20 in some form or fashion had some semblance of an alliance, and there was articulation over some period of time granted for every single course in that conglomeration of organizations. Well, for sure, if you go outside that organization, you're going to lose that articulation. You're going to lose your credits. But think about the scenario when you stay inside any of those 20 colleges, and all of a sudden that articulation maybe is not the bane of your existence anymore, Terry, but it becomes an asset for that larger scale organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with that. And that's, I think where the kind of work that Tom is doing around, let's say you get those 10 institutions together, not only do they need, the articulation, they need to make sure the courses are being offered at the right time. So,
Right.
So Tom, if you want to comment on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is that we just don't look at this stuff in kind of comprehensive and pragmatic ways, typically at institutions. Again, we kind of consider, kind of down the path of academic freedom, that the course schedule, because it's part of their rolling out of their classes, is kind of this extension of academic freedom. And instead of saying, look, we've got to coordinate all of these different entities together, and maybe decide that, hey, we just don't have the capacity to teach a particular course, and we know that an institution down the road has that course and has seats available. And so, but we only can get to that conversation by studying the data, realizing that we have a problem, and looking at it systematically, right? And then and again, focusing on the pragmatic element of what we're trying to do with finite resources versus kind of being dogmatic about, well, we can't allow our students to take classes from them because they'll be different quality and we're giving away FTEs or whatever the dogma happens to be. But instead say, look, let's look at this practically. We can't be all things to all people. We can't teach every major in every conceivable way all the time. We just don't have the capacity to do that. It's a zero-sum world. So how do we get the most impact in alignment with our students? And it's certainly not by having no game plan and allowing everybody to do what they want and not really collaborating between departments.
Yeah. Go ahead, Gary. You had a comment or question, right?
Yeah, so I want a follow-up question for Tom, but a setup first. And a couple weeks ago, I was talking with a medium-sized college president, and we were talking about the early parts of collaboration. I said, hey, what about those low enrollment courses?
Yeah.
We'll use Glenn's example of chemistry. You've got an upper level chemistry course for students in your college, and you're paying an adjunct faculty member $1,000 a credit, whatever, to pay to teach that class.
Yes.
What happens, Tom, if you look at bringing, again, just picking a number, 10 colleges, each with 4 students in that upper level chemistry or English course, and bring them together in one online course? Well, we all know what happens. The costs stay the same, and then net revenue goes up, Tom.
Right. Yeah. And that's exactly right. And, we study this stuff. We benchmark course fill rates in a metric. It's a simple metric we call enrollment ratio. And it's basically a room agnostic metric that looks at census enrollment divided by the course caps. And we aggregate by the course on a particular campus or modality, right? So what we find is kind of a shocking, and we have 320 institutions, I think, in this benchmark now. we find that on a typical campus in a typical major term, usually a fall is when we benchmark, that only about a third of the courses are really balanced with student demand, with a shocking number, the highest percentage actually, Gary, are in this underfilled, below 70% fill rate kind of category, which basically means that almost half of the curriculum is being subsidized by really high enrollment, high fill classes. And that's not something that's sustainable probably with what's going to happen to college revenues going forward. And it's not something that's necessary, right? We can, again, if we look at it systematically and in a more planful way, we can cut a lot of those down, either through collaboration like you're mentioning, or deciding, we're only going to teach on certain campuses at certain time and developing a plan for that. There are a lot of different ways to attack this, but only if you have visibility into the problem.
Right. And one of the questions is, how do you get buy-in internally from faculty and administration? Well, I don't think first of all, it has to be made easier to do. So accreditation bodies are going to have to allow it to happen. And they do to a certain extent. You do see consortia and so on. Even the Claremont colleges are a good example of an existing collaboration / consortium. And actually I was talking to another colleague at AAC&U who was saying, yes, there are lots of different consortia, but they aren't to the level yet where they're really integrating and sharing classes. So I think the first step is identifying consortia that exist and finding ways to deepen those connections in terms of sharing courses, and using those as examples to then write the research papers, the white papers, and say, look, this is a viable alternative to closing. That's the point we're at right now, is that there are institutions that are going to close that probably wouldn't have to if we created this kind of collaboration consortium, whatever we want to call it. And so getting the buy-in is not going to be that difficult when it's a matter of survival. The bigger question is, how do we get to the point of saying that this is, it's clearly better than closing, but how do we get people talking more about it?
And I would offer that the market will move this pattern, and it's got to be a material change. It can't be $10,000 here and $10,000 there. It's got to be millions of dollars in cost reduction or new revenue, net revenue, not new revenue, but net revenue enhancements. And the market's going to move it. The regulatory bodies almost have to follow the market. But we're going to call it tough love and move on. What we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is not that complex. It's been done in many other industries. Somebody's going to do it. Somebody's probably working on it right now. Envision if you were a first mover and brought together 10 or 20, the competitive advantages you have will be monstrous. On the other hand, as Tevyev said, what if you don't? Mm-hmm. You could be stable financially now, but find yourself at a competitive disadvantage if you weren't part of one of those larger organizations. Yes, it's tough. It's ridiculously tough. Every time some kind of business model changes, the protests are constant. And I remember Concordia in Portland. Mm-hmm. Within 24 hours of Concordia Portland announcing their closure, one student had filed a class action suit. And I see that everywhere this happens. And Glenn, God bless you for being the president of a college. It's not a fun gig, because every time these things happen, those roles get ugly, but it's just part of the process.
Yes.
Well, but does it really need to be part of the process? You're right, it is. Before I left the public system in California, we had what's called guided pathways, and my college was deeply involved in that national program. And so the whole intention here was actually to build a continuous schedule all the way through the 2 or worst case 3-year pattern, in which a student actually would know where they're going. And so from course to course to course, they actually have a very clear idea of what their end goal is and how that pathway is getting them there. Even to the point of saying, you get to the end of this, here are the jobs that, or careers that are going to be available to you, and here's what they're going to pay. And so the student will, through transparency, know from the very beginning, I enter into this course of study, then I may love it to death, but I get to the end and I don't have a livable wage at that point. That was a very important program. It did meet resistance. And the fact of the matter is, and I don't want to be specific on this because it'll get too controversial, but there are protections for faculty that makes these kinds of changes very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. And it gets me back that reordering our thinking to our students are our clients, they are our mission, they are our goal, and how that changes the way our lives work should be less relevant than that is. And so how many times have I seen, well, I even see it in business, where somebody comes into a structured job, they know what that structure is, but over time, there is this movement toward, let's restructure that so that it fits my lifestyle better. And it's kind of like that, is that you may come in as a brand new faculty member and the department gives you these courses. Some of them may be in the evening. And over time, it begins to migrate to a point of convenience. And so I'm sorry if I insulted anybody by saying so, but it's what I have seen over my 30 years. And so until we become student-centric, student outcome-centric, it's going to be hard to see change.
Yeah, but you know, the problem with that, Glenn, yeah, I was at University of Washington, I was at University of Texas at Austin, and you know, I know that the incentives for faculty at these large R1 institutions is to publish. You know? and you know, frankly, you know, that was towards, as I got to full professor, that was frustrating for me because I knew I couldn't focus as much on teaching, and I knew that I had to focus more on, you know, where you doing quality research, which is not a horrible thing. It's just we need to find balance. And there are those institutions, obviously that's why we call them R1, because they're research institutions. But you know, that's not where the vast majority of students are going to college. And you know, I want to come back to Terrence's questions. You know, do students really want to do an online course? You know, it's like an upper level chem student. You know, it depends. If they're at Notre Dame, no, they're not going to want to do their, you know, they're paying a lot of money to do, you know, face-to-face. But if they're at Menlo College, I had a ton of students who wanted to do online courses if it made it easier for their life and their schedule. You know, it's not just about the faculty's lives being, you know, being able to schedule things that fits better for their lives. It's about the students, things being able to fit their lives. You know, we had, I mean, almost every student on that campus, and even at UT Austin, you know, I can't tell you how many times I had students come and tell me, you know, I can't take this class because it interferes with my work schedule. You know? And that's not what you want to hear, but that's the reality of these students. You know, my attitude when I was at UT Austin was like, well, why are you working? You know, you should stop working and go to school, focus on school. It's like, well, that's not that person's reality. They have to work. And, you know I had to work when I was an undergrad. I was lucky that I could work on campus, but so that made my life easier, but not everybody can work on campus. And, I think Mani's point is, and thanks Jeff for your comments, agile transformation is really critical at this time. But, not all students have the understanding of navigating through online, which is, and I'm sure you can address this, Glenn. I mean, what do you guys do to help students navigate to that online education?
Well, what we do, we have kind of a unique model, which is one of the reasons that I joined Cal Southern, is that we have a one-to-one. So our faculty are called mentors. And so the faculty mentor has delivered the curriculum out onto the platform, and each mentor has a student. We have a one-to-one faculty to student ratio. And now that doesn't mean they only have one student, but each student has that mentor that is basically on 24/7 communication possibility there. The other is we have academic advisors, and the academic advisors are also pretty much on a one-to-one ratio as well. And this is where more on the student services side, the learner services side, students can get support from that side as well. In terms of outreach, it's really just the attraction of being able to learn on your own schedule, as you had talked about, because it fits my schedule. I have to be honest, most of our students are actually working adults. And so they may be already practicing psychologists and things like that. So, but what I think is going to happen is because of the pandemic and because of people, students and faculty and professors becoming more familiar with the quality of online education, that the younger student is in a much larger way is going to migrate to that delivery method.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because I'm trying to figure out what my son is finishing right now, actually his first year of college, and he's trying to figure out what he was going to do over the summer. And he is looking at getting a remote internship or job. But I said, well, why don't you don't have to do it for credit, just go on Coursera and take a class, so that like take a intro econ class, and when you take the regular econ class, you'll have a leg up, and understand the basics, so you'll do better when you take the regular econ class,
Right.
And so I think Coursera's numbers already are going through the roof of people taking classes right now, and I think that's even going to get bigger over the summer, because you don't necessarily need to take the class for credit. You just want to take that class because you need the knowledge, or you have a class that you're going to take eventually for credit, and I think that's another way we're going to see online playing an important role. I think somebody was saying they're taking it. I mean, I'm taking an edX course right now because it's free, and it's with one of my former Stanford professors, and I'm like, hey, this is cool. I hadn't really explored it that much until now. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we're going to see this play out. And the faculty, the one thing I will say is, and I'm sure this is true for you at Cal Southern, is that the faculty have to be at the core of all of this. And I know Tom knows this. Well, we all know this. The faculty are critical to any change that's made, and that comes back to I'm really not worried as much about the students wanting to take online courses. I'm more worried about the faculty being prepared to do the kind of that hybrid approach, and being trained properly, and supporting, coming in. And actually, it's funny, all my friends now are saying they're all being pulled into task forces and committees to talk about this transition into the fall. Yeah. And it's something that we have to keep in mind. And they are going to have to come back to, what does it mean to teach online? And because the future is so uncertain that it's very likely, even if we come back to residential campuses in the fall, that there's going to be another point in the near future where we're going to be teaching online again. And so I do think this summer is going to be a time that we're going to, Monty saying, her son's at UW Seattle, and they're just posting recorded sessions with little interaction. That's not a great model, obviously. And I know my son, who's in high school, is dealing with that as well. And he's basically crashing and burning this semester because he can't, it's too hard to keep himself motivated when he doesn't have the structure. So that's part of the issue is, we have to do this and create structure. You can't have, yes, students need to be able to do it on their own time, but I do believe that, you also have to, have structure. So, I think that it's the fact, we need to pull the faculty together and really decide how we're going to move forward. Some are going to be better at doing online than others. And maybe, we make sure that those faculty are, the ones doing online. And I know there's so many different ways to approach it, but in any case,
Terry, if you don't mind, really quickly, just to throw out what I hope is an optimistic kind of a comment here for everybody. Our experience has been that that if we can start with some objective benchmarking, faculty are almost always very supportive of thoughtful, planned out, justifiable change, if it's not just, dramatic, and it's not just, based upon anecdotes. I mean, they've literally been trained to challenge, they're trained skeptics, that he once said to me, and I think that's a good way of looking at it. And we all should be, right? So we always like to start with benchmarking and understanding the lay of the land so that people can see the forest instead of being focused on the individual trees. And then, talking through the different options. And there's always in our world, at least, there's always opportunity to make iterative change and dial it to the needs of the institution, right? Not everybody is going to have existential financial challenges in the next year, but most are going to have some financial challenges. Well, if we dive in and look at where the opportunities are, and then we get as aggressive as we need to be relative to our financial needs and our students' needs, there's a path forward here. We just need to take the time to be thoughtful and understand really the lay of the land at our institutions. I think a lot of times we're tempted to kind of take the easy approach and just go for, let's cut 10% across everything, or let's shift to a different kind of a mode because I read an article about that and that sounds like something that's working for another institution. Well, faculty are going to resist something like that because they should resist it. Those are not great strategies, right? We just need to be a lot more thoughtful about how we approach these problems.
I agree completely. I mean, that's one of the things that, whenever I've been in a leadership position or been consulting with somebody is I say that the first thing I do is a 360 review. I want to talk to everybody. I want to get a sense of where the institution is at. I want to understand where the strength, you do a SWOT analysis. We talked about that in our strategic planning webinar a couple of weeks ago, is, you do it some kind of, you need, like you were saying, faculty respond to data, to reality. They're not just out there doing what they do. They understand that there's often need for change, and sometimes they're at the forefront of that. I mean, faculty can be extremely innovative and willing to join in. But in any case, I want to come back to Jeff's point about the student being a customer. I mean, it's so funny because that always is like you want to make faculty mad, call their student a customer. But the reality is that I forget the terminology. The reality is that students are price sensitive. They want to know that they're going to be able to graduate on time. They want to know that they're going to be able to get the schedule they need, all of these things. And regardless of whether you call them the customer or not, they're looking at all these things that are going to, determine whether they're successful or not. And they're a lot more savvy these days. It's not like, the old days where you couldn't find information on colleges. They're looking online, their parents are looking online. I see Mani's question, changes in tuition. It's a hard pill to swallow when you're paying this, the same money for a cobbled online learning scenario. Well, this is an emergency. That's the bottom line there. And these colleges can't pivot on a dime. Actually they have pivoted on a dime, but not in the way that we would want in the longer term. So, my expectation is things are going to be much higher quality. If for some reason we have to go to remote teaching again in the fall, that the quality will be much different. But Gary had a comment on the tuition costs.
Yeah, and again, that's exactly it, the tuition cost. One of the reasons private colleges, and I just focus on privates, will be hard pressed to lower tuitions because they have that cost basis.
Yes,
it is what it is. And so again, it goes back to the same point that I shared a couple of times. You have to scale those costs, and in almost every case in our research, you can't do that as a standalone college.
Right. And that's been the reason I've been looking at this issue, is because I know there's some really fantastic institutions out there that have all these fixed costs, and, they need to do something about that. I look at the Portland area where my son goes to college, and I'm like, there's all these, where Concordia, went out of business. And, there's all these institutions. I'm like, well, what, and plus, we haven't even talked about the fact that they're going to, if they do decide to bring students back, they need to have more space. because they can't have as many students in the same space. And so, what if they took the Concordia campus and said, okay, Lewis and Clark, Portland State, University of Portland, you guys can use these different classrooms so that you can space students out, do your classes at different times, whatever, make it easier to have social distancing, but we're going to work together and share this space. So anyway.
That's a start.
Yes, that's a start. That's why, I made sure I sent my article on collaboration to the folks at Lewis and Clark. I'm like, hey, you guys, think about this, please. But for me, obviously, I'm an insider, so I know I'm going to pay my son's tuition because I want my son's institution to survive. And, that's just the reality right now. If you care about that institution and if you want this to be an institution that your child can go to in the future, pay the tuition. I'm not a big fan of the airlines, but because of the timing of my canceling my ticket to Austin for South by Southwest EDU, I had to pay a change fee. And I said, it's not a lot of money for me, but I see all the money that the airlines are losing, and I'm not going to go after them to get that, that amount of money back. And it's, we're in that environment where, I saw some friends complaining about parking fees that they hadn't gotten reimbursed. I'm like, oh, come on, the parking lots are still there. The people who, run the parking lots and make sure they're clean and all that are still there. If you want to be at an institution that has these facilities and so on, this pandemic is not going to last forever. And if we undercut them now, we're going to lose them. But that doesn't mean they can't find ways to reduce costs. And, especially going forward, we know a lot of campuses are using their dorms for healthcare workers, for first responders, so on, they're going to have to, what are they going to do in the fall if we have another wave and we need those spaces again? And but anyway, I just want to throw some of those things out there about why collaboration makes so much sense. It's partly this situation we're in, but Gary, you've been doing this stuff for a long time, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. And I know we all have been thinking about this in terms of how are we going to, maintain the capacity to teach as many students who need to be taught, while, making sure that we're doing it in a cost-effective way. And that comes back to the question about tuition, right? It's like, are we doing things in the most cost-effective way possible while maintaining quality? Yes, I want Stanford to maintain their quality, but that's a very different kind of institution. That's not where, it's more the Concordias, the Lewis and Clarks, the Portland States, those kinds of institutions that are the ones that are going to have to figure out the way through here. So parting comments from Gary, I'll start with you.
Sure, and just a really quick example, and Tom, I'll pick the private colleges between you and me, Kansas City and St. Louis. There are about 10. I can tell you the one that is really successful, and I can probably rank the other 8 or 9 of which ones are most likely to not be able to make it. They either choose a different business model, or they choose to ultimately not be there for their students, for their faculty, and for their communities.
Right. Tom, you want to follow up with any comments?
Yeah, I mean, our focus is a little bit more micro. So what we're advocating, frankly, we've been advocating for 24 years, is an evolution and just kind of the process of scheduling to make it more student aligned and collaborative and data informed. And, at the risk of, using this situation to our own interest, which unfortunately is happening a lot right now. Hopefully I don't sound that way, but I really do believe that now we have to do these kinds of things. We have to allocate our faculty in a way that's more intentional and more cohesive, and it's doable, and it's difficult, but it's doable, and we need to.
Absolutely. And Glenn, last thoughts?
Well, I think the successful colleges and universities of the future are going to be those that have put students first and offer exactly what they need and when they need it, and provide the support they need to be successful.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And on that note, we are right at 10 o'clock. So for those who want to share this with your colleagues, this is being recorded and I'll be posting it hopefully on our website later today, as long as Zoom keeps up with the recordings. We did have a couple that didn't go so well, but hey, 6 out of 8 isn't bad. In any case, I can't say enough how much I appreciate you guys' willingness to get on here with us, and we will be sharing this, of course. And if you guys have any follow-up, please follow up with these guys. They're all very open to discussion, and on LinkedIn, or as well as you can get a hold of them directly. So in any case, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be back in other formats coming up over the next month. I'll post on our site and LinkedIn and so on, where I'll be helping out with some different webinars and so on. But in the meantime, I hope everybody stays well. That is the number one thing. And we hope that the next few months aren't too incredibly stressful for everybody. That's stay healthy and get your exercise, all those kinds of things. Anyway, all right, take care, everybody. I'm signing off, and don't forget check out Chell, our website at www.higheredleads.com, and we always are welcoming to anybody who wants to discuss these issues. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Terry. Bye.